Well, welcome to the first episode of the Tech Vault with myself, Mitchell Sellers, and I've got Mods here from Microsoft to talk about Visual Studio 2026 and all of the things coming with the Insider channel. Welcome, Mods. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at Microsoft.
Yeah, hey, thanks for having me on your show. Yeah, I'm Mads Kristensen, and I'm on the Visual Studio and the community team, working with both the product and with all the users and MVPs such as yourself, and channeling all the feedback back to the product team so that we can ultimately create the best product we possibly can to suit your needs and to meet your requirements. That's kind of my role, and I've been doing this for about 15 years.
Well, that is fantastic. We absolutely love it, and it's exciting to see, you know, all of the transitions that have happened in Visual Studio over the years. When I first started as a .NET developer, we had to wait until, we got the MSDN disks in the
Yeah,
mail. And we had to
yeah.
install, and then it was the way it was until we got the
Mhm.
next set of disks in the mail, and then we installed it, right? And so we've been
Yeah.
experiencing such evolution, and that evolution over the last couple of years has been, Visual Studio 2022. We've been there for a really long time, and we
Mhm.
keep getting better, right? I mean, we've gotten through .NET 6, 7, 8, 9. We have the preview releases of 10. Now we're finally getting to Visual Studio 2026. So what was the impetus to make that transition? Why are we finally getting a new shell, and does this maybe set a stage for what we might see going forward too?
Yep. Well, okay, yeah, I remember those MSDN days too. By the way, my first launch when I joined the team was Visual Studio 2010 Service Pack 1. Remember we had service packs?
Yes, exactly, right? And
Yeah,
for the early days, they were DVDs, and you're
yeah.
like, okay. Oh, and I believe Visual Studio, at least like early days, I believe it was 2 discs. I can't remember. I mean, now I installed the Insider channel the other day, and I think it was 23 gig on disk, but I mean, we won't talk about that.
It depends on what kind of workloads you install. I think if you install the
Yeah.
C++ workload, for instance, you get a bunch of tools and stuff that are pretty heavy. And if you install other workloads, it's yeah.
For me,
So
it's
it
Maui.
depends.
It's Maui and ASP.NET, and then it just goes
Oh yeah,
crazy
and
high. So
it puts down the Android emulator and stuff like that. It's
exactly,
all adding
exactly.
up. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, so we've had 4 years with 2022, and so because we launched 2022 in November of 2021, just to make it very confusing.
Yeah, you're
So
right. Okay, you're right. That's true. Okay,
yeah,
makes
so
sense.
4 years it's been in existence, and so why cut a new one now? Why not 2 years ago? We've had like usually between major releases of Visual Studio, we see about 2 years. We've
Right.
had periods where it's a little longer, but we've also had periods that's shorter. For instance, we had Visual Studio 2012 and then 2013. So that was
Right.
only a year between those two. And so there's usually a good reason for why these things happen. And it has to do with either we have to break backwards compatibility. So something is changing. We cannot break backwards compatibility in a minor update to Visual Studio. We have to do it in a major version release. That's what happened with 2022. We made the shift to 64-bit, which would make all extensions break. So we broke backwards compatibility with extensions in 2022.
Okay, that's right. I remember that. Okay.
Yep. So we had to
So what
do,
did
and
so what
so
did you break with 2026?
well, we didn't really break anything. That was not the reason
Okay.
for doing it. So backwards compatibility is one reason
Okay.
why we may want to
Okay.
cut a new version, but there are other reasons too. So one is it's been a long time. 2022 sounds old, right? It's like we need a new name at a very minimum to get rid of that old feeling. Then we had the UI. The UI was kind of old. It was getting dated. And so people kind of don't make a big deal out of the UI. It's not a big deal. Who cares? The thing is, a lot of people do. And we hear that all the time. You have to remember that Visual Studio is one of those apps that you use all day, every day. Like you spend half your waking life using Visual Studio. And so these things, like if it doesn't feel great, um, if you don't feel like you're in a like you're sitting in a cockpit of a modern airplane and having a good time, you feel like you're being outdated a little bit. And so no one wants that feeling. And so it's the same thing with your house, right? If you're living in a house and the paint on your walls are starting to, not look so great anymore, or your kitchen is getting old and, outdated, it's, you want to do something about it maybe, right? You kind of want to live in a place that's more aligned with your values and makes you feel good and feel proud and all those type of things.
Yeah,
So that's the same thing with Visual Studio.
and it's so true, right? Just in my time playing, with the Insider Channel and kind of looking at things, the feel is absolutely different. It's kind of like, SQL Server Management Studio did it as well a while back with
Mhm.
their change to come in, and it's amazing how buttons now have color, icons have a color, so like, oh, this is what you're looking for. Even just some of the visual styles, outlines, borders, things of active tabs actually having a full border around them makes it navigation easier, feels more modern. Not to mention, I know, huge performance increases. One of the things I'm seeing, it's time to open and load a project, build a project.
Mhm.
When I have, 2022 versus 2026 side by side, uh, it's light years difference. And that feel, it's hard. It's the same thing we deal with our apps as we bring things forward, as we move things forward. So it's awesome to see that Microsoft is acknowledging and doing the kind of the same things that we have to do with the software that we're building for customers.
Yep.
Is this a, you know speaking to versions and also the name, right? Like that's one of the things I always get is at the conference talks, right? When I'm speaking, they're like, well, Visual Studio 2022, is that really the newest one, right? And I know there's a shift in um, some places, right, where we've been using semantic versioning, right? Because we know behind the scenes, right, VS 2022 is also known as version 17. VS
Yep.
2026 is version 18.
Mhm.
There's also been a shift, and I'm seeing more people talking about, well, just drop that, do version numbering like Tesla does with, I have a Tesla Cybertruck, and my software version is 2025 dot the week number and then a release. Is there ever any thought of like just changing and going back old school to it's Visual Studio and using the release numbers, or are we going to keep seeing kind of leapfrog products, or anything you can say about that, just for like what we might expect going
Yeah.
forward? It's hard to predict.
Uh-huh. Yeah, no, that's a great question. So, yeah, because you might think, okay, so we just changed 2022 to 2026. We're just kicking the can down the road. We're going to have the same issue by, feeling outdated in a year from now, right?
Right.
So are we just buying ourselves a year? Is that what we're doing here? No, we're not. Uh, but just for the history of this whole thing, originally we actually wanted to call this just Visual Studio, like you're saying, like
Hmm.
drop the version completely and it's just Visual Studio. Um, we ran into some issues with that because, and this is getting kind of technical, and I don't fully understand all the reasons, but it has to do with licensing and subscriptions, and support. So
Hmm.
we have a bunch of companies, enterprises out there that are buying these support deals, right? Where they have like for the lifetime of Visual Studio 2022 or 2019 or whatever. So if we just have Visual Studio, like we have to change the licenses. Otherwise, a lifetime of Visual Studio means now forever, right?
So you're kind of talking potentially, right? The same shift that we had from .NET Framework getting security updates tied to Windows versus .NET Core or .NET 9 and 10, whatever we want to call it now, right? Having its own support cycle rather than being tied to the Windows OS, that kind of thing as well.
Well,
Just kind of limiting that support structure. Is that
it's
kind of
it's it's part of it, but it's more like you buy. It's the way. So that's the part I don't fully understand because I'm not
okay?
on the business side of
Yeah,
the house. But it
that's
has to do with the way you buy licenses, and you
okay.
get your licenses for your whole enterprise and the seats and all that type of stuff, whether it's pro or enterprise. And there's different license model and subscription models that play a role here. So we had to like also, if we had to do that, we had to also completely change how we charge for Visual Studio and all that. Anyway, that's like a huge thing, and we already had ongoing license agreements that were just signed like last previous week
Right.
and whatnot. Right, so we had all this stuff in flight, and so it proved to be kind of very difficult for that simple reason, right? Which is actually not that simple, but
No,
So
I mean
anyway,
it is. That's. I mean that's exactly it, right? I mean it's
yeah,
always a little thing that
it's not
ends up being the big thing.
satisfying to hear that that is one of the reasons, right? But it's at least it's a reason that maybe people can understand. Okay, so
Mhm.
then we had the issue with the year 2022, 2026, right? What should we call it? Well, let's drop the year so we don't run into that issue with feeling old.
Right.
Let's use our internal version number, which is 18. And so, if you might remember, right, in the for the MVPs, we actually called this. We thought we were going to name this Visual Studio 18.
Yep.
That was the name that we went with for a long time, like 6 months.
Yep. Exactly.
That was the going assumption that this was going to be the name. We're going to make this a public name because that's easy to reason about. It's not going to be old. It's just going to be our internal version that's now also our external version number, and simple, right?
Right.
All these things fixed. So that had some other complications, and so we ended up with 2026. Now that doesn't mean that we're going to be 2026 for 4 years.
Okay.
It doesn't mean that the internal version 18 is going to switch to 19 in 4 years from now.
Okay. Okay.
Maybe 18 is the last major version number, right? Maybe like this is the stuff that we're finding out and we're like exploring right now, because one thing is for sure, we're not gonna be 2026 in 4 years.
Okay. So would you say it's
So
safe if we're planning, right? Don't
yeah,
bank
so
anything on version numbers. Is really what
right.
I'm
So
hearing.
there's a difference between what the technical version of Visual Studio is and what we call it among ourselves out. The users,
Mhm.
we call this Visual Studio 2026 December update, right? Or January update, whatever we want to
Right.
call, because we do monthly updates now, and they have the name of the, like, we're about to ship the September update for Visual Studio 2022.
Right, that makes sense. That's awesome. Yeah,
Uh,
and it's fun to look at this and it's interesting for those of us that do a lot with like Azure SQL as well, where banking on version numbers has actually caused a bunch of issues over the years. And my fun one on the version number side with the Microsoft evolution is that SQL Azure actually identifies as an older version number than the latest release, even though it's the equivalent of the most current release of SQL Server,
mm,
because Azure SQL internally doesn't need to tick that version number forward. And so it's one of the fun things in some of the open source stuff that I do, where we got bit by, oh, we're going to determine that your SQL Server, 20 whatever and later by looking at this version number, and then come to find out Azure is like, we don't need that. And so they just left the version number different. And so one of the things I always get from people is like version, but again, it doesn't really matter, right? I've been on VS 2022 forever, had to keep 2019 for a while. Now with even the Insider, I've moved everything over and just working day to day in the Insider channel, no issues, right? From
yeah,
a
same
development
here.
experience. So
Mhm.
it's just great. It's just good to see that evolution. And as I always kind of tell people, the name is just the name of what it's called right now. We see it. We see so much evolution with names and Word and Excel and all of them. Right? We've seen some of the same things where years got dropped off and different things. So it's just exciting to see that evolution.
And keep an eye out on the Visual Studio blog, because we'll have more on all this coming in the coming
Okay.
months. So we'll have that all flushed out, and you'll be the first to know if you read the blog post there as we publish it. So um, it will all make good sense. It will all make good sense. But right now it's a little too early to share it all out. So
Okay. Yeah.
all
No
in due
worries.
time. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, kind of diving right into it, I know everybody's asked you and you've done this with other folks, but as I look at 2026, right, there's all kinds of things that I see for myself that are just light year enhancements, right? We talked a little bit earlier already just about the visual, right?
Hmm.
The cleaner environment, the, you know, your eye is caught more quickly with the icons and the colors. And I'm an avid dark mode user. I've always been a dark mode user. It's so nice to see icons that have pops of color, even though I'm in dark mode. It's absolutely amazing. Performance, right, is one of my big things. And I see, some really, really nice things on that side of the thing, side of the front. But before I ask you a couple of the fun, I hope we fix these issues. What's the one thing, just the one thing where you're like, I have to use VS 2026 now. I don't want to go back to VS 2022.
Well, that's the performance.
Okay, it is.
Like so,
It,
yeah.
I haven't done full metrics on this yet, but I'm seeing literally a 50 to 60% reduction from the
Mhm.
initial start time to projects ready, project builds, navigating around. One of the things I got into a habit of doing was always closing out of whatever tabs I had open before I exited a project, just so that the next time I started it, it didn't take forever to
Yeah.
load, especially with my large projects. I'm not
There's a
doing that.
setting for that, right?
Yeah, I know there is. I found it the other day. But
Okay.
the settings is actually my big thing. The new settings experience. That is
Hmm.
the one thing. I was on the VS Toolbox talking with them, a little while ago about some settings. And you just have to be bored one afternoon, right? To go digging through the settings,
Oh
and
yeah, it's
especially
a
in VS
fun thing to
2022.
do.
Oh, it
Hmm.
is. And you're also, it's angering, if I'm being perfectly honest, right? I found a couple settings. I'm like, does this do what I think it does? And you check the box, and all of a sudden, the thing you've been complaining about for 6 months or 4 years in the case of one of them, all of a sudden it's better, right? And so
Hmm.
the experience differences as a whole is the one thing for me where it's just kind of crazy. Now that all settings and that settings navigation, it's much more like what you get when you go and edit a project, right? Is the best way I can
Yeah.
describe it
Yeah.
visually. I don't want to try to share a screen for
Uh-huh.
everybody here, but that experience makes things so much more discoverable. A little bit faster, a little bit easier. But one of the things, for me, as I look forward, you know, VS 2026 is being touted as, the AI enhancements and some of the things, really, Copilot having a better, a better seat at the table, more integrated, easier to use. One of my pet peeves in VS 2022 is that we've added on and added on over the years, right? We've always had IntelliSense, and it tries to autocomplete and make my life better. We got Copilot, which is trying to help me really look at my code and maybe give me even more insightful things. And then I've been an avid user of a couple of extensions as well that help me with formatting and cleanup. And in 2022, you know, it was very easy for IntelliSense and Copilot to fight with each other. And then all of a sudden, I get partial completions or a file gets messed up and we have to go back and review. With the emphasis on AI, right? And Copilot improvements. Is that some of what was also part of VS 2026, improving that experience? Obviously the performance of it's better, but is it, was the developer experience, the typing experience, the completion experience? Can you tell me maybe a little bit from a
Hmm.
Copilot perspective? What's new?
Yeah. Okay. So, well, let's start with the thing you're saying, like where we have the completions are fighting, like
Yeah.
IntelliSense versus Copilot completions are kind of stepping on each other a little bit. So that is something we're taking very seriously because that's the bread and butter. Like if you ask people what they love about Visual Studio, like 9 out of 10 people will say IntelliSense. And so we're
Absolutely.
very careful not to mess that up. But we did with Copilot. It got kind of, it changed to an extent where some people really found it annoying. Some people love it, by the way. But a cohort of users think it's too much.
Hmm.
And then there's the objectives. All like no matter what camp you're in, it's like, oh yeah, they interfered with each other. That's not good. That's a bug kind of thing, right? So we want to eliminate all those bugs, and we actually have eliminated quite a bit. Um, but some people like the Copilot completions to maybe not come up when you just type. They only should only come up when you like invoke them
Hmm.
directly. And so that's one of the things. Do we have that in yet, or is it coming? One of the two. But
Yeah,
the
I
idea
saw
that
something. There's some stuff in the release notes I saw about it. I can't remember if it was where it
yeah,
was.
I'm
Look.
actually fuzzy on it right now too. But where you can say, hey, don't show up that ghost text that wants to complete the line or multiple lines of suggested code that it has. You can tell it not to do that automatically, but only do it when you hit a keyboard shortcut. So that's really cool, right? So you get the Copilot completions when you want it, when you explicitly ask for it, but it does not come up on its own to interfere with, the IntelliSense that you might, and love, and maybe you've been using for decades.
Well, I can tell you right now, that's the biggest area for me that's usually been a little bit of trouble. And I solved it in 2022, oftentimes by just toggling away. Because
Mhm.
one of the areas I always have is like you're working with something, you're working with a class, you do a dot, and then there's a property that you're trying to set, but it Copilot was like, "Hey, I think I know what you're doing," and it tries
Yeah.
to fill it out, and it does a really
Right.
good job, but it does little weird things like it doesn't capitalize. It went lowercase instead of uppercase for that first letter. So the
Yeah.
completion is
Yeah.
like almost good, but then when you complete, now you have to go back, right? Because it completed the whole thing. So you end up doing
Uh-huh.
more typing to go back and do it. And so those are some of the things. What's really fun is I tried to replicate those errors after installing the Insider channel release. I can't get it to do it, which is awesome. And I had some
Right.
scenarios where it was absolutely happening. So it's just exciting to see that everywhere we go, right, we see Copilot, but we also respect the roots, because I think that's one of the biggest things. Visual Studio, there's people that have other IDE things. I've always been a Visual Studio person. I've tried the other things, but I've always had better productivity with Visual Studio. So it's awesome to hear how much you guys are really trying to make sure that we keep that productivity, even when that productivity might be impacted by an even more productive tool. Because let's just be honest, GitHub Copilot is absolutely fantastic and it adds to it. But there's times and places where I'm not doing the really fancy stuff. And so it's really awesome to see, how some of that's going to continue to move on and evolve. Um,
Another example of that is where the Copilot came in that we fixed was if this is C# and you have an event handler, so you write button dot mouse click and then plus equals,
yep.
and you or tap twice or space twice,
Yes.
because you want it to like this is something Visual Studio has done for decades, right?
Yep.
Auto
You want to
generate
auto generate the
the
handler.
event handler.
Yep.
Like now, Copilot would come in and say, "Oh yeah, I'm assuming you want to call a method called onButtonClicked, which doesn't exist, and it only inserts the onButtonClick, but now you have no event handler. Just call something that doesn't exist." So that was like that one really bothered me too. I ran
Yep,
into that
that's
all
my
the
other one.
time.
Yep, that was one of the. And actually, I feel bad because I was communicating with one of the other product team people, and I could not remember the scenario. That's the exact scenario that I was
Uh-huh.
forgetting about, and that's the thing. And it's it's really interesting as a developer using these tools, right? The things that bother us, right? Because you guys are building the tools to help us do our job better. And so then we're using these tools to make our productivity better. And watching how we get a conflict, the things I can do now by, opening up Copilot chat in agent mode and say, hey, I did all of this code. I was a bad developer. I said, hey, I'm gonna document this later, which we all know never happens. Well, now it can, right? Agent mode and
Right.
documentation, when you have a standard, it's amazing, right?
Right.
And
And
some of those kinds of things. And it's a hugely powerful tool.
And so
But
that's another thing we're looking at, right? So those things that you kind of do all the time, having to go to the chat window to like say, hey, can you add comments to this class or this method? Like that's kind of cumbersome
mhm,
for something you do multiple times a day, or you do multiple classes in a row and having to do that. So some of those things we're putting into a context menu, so you can just right click a method and say right click and it says document this or something like that. Generate
yeah.
documentation.
I was just gonna say,
Yeah.
my three favorite Copilot things are the three buttons that are there now all the time. So you right click on a class or anywhere in the code file, and you get Copilot actions, and you now get explain, generate comments, and
Yeah.
my favorite one, generate tests. For those of us that are really bad about, not being TDD and developing the test first, um, it's amazing how much work we can get done right there in Visual Studio, right? I've been
You
playing
forgot
around
my
with.
favorite one in
What's
there
your
is
favorite one?
optimized selection is in there too.
Oh, I haven't played with that one. It's
You
grayed
have
out
to
with
have
file.
you have to make a selection, select some text or some code, and then optimize. You know what's really cool about it too? If you have like Markdown that doesn't have any code in it. You used to have like a README file or something. You can make a selection and say optimize this, and it will optimize your grammar and stuff. It's really handy.
Yeah, and one of the things really cool with these interactions, and I think it's kind of nice in the prompts. I don't necessarily want to go crazy into screen share, but I'm gonna flip over and I'm gonna show one piece of my screen here for just a second, because these interactions and usability, right, are the big things that I see as a huge win in the new version. And so I just use that optimize option. And what's really cool is it didn't mess up my code file, because this was the other thing that happened in 2022. You accidentally get that completion, or you did something, and now you're using undo or redo, that kind of thing. The fact that these actions that you choose, they show up, they preview with a diff view now. So you can see here, it's going to change this line to this line. I have to tab to accept. From my perspective too, this is that same way of introducing that stopgap to make it so that I can decide, hey, I like this. If I don't do tab, I don't accept it, nothing got messed up in my file. I don't have to go and undo. I don't have to go back and use, my get, undo, revert changes, those kinds of things. So it's just really awesome to see that developer experience, that developer performance kind of thing moving forward. It's just great. And I'm sure there's going to be a ton of other things. I plan on, with this channel, continuing to talk about some of these as more of them get out there and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And we're just excited to be able to do it. Now, obviously we're in public insider channel, ability for people to get out and use Visual Studio. For those that don't know, I've got the download link out here. But what do you want? What's your expectation from the community, right? We're in this phase where we don't know exactly when it's going to be released yet, for sure. There's talk, right, of maybe we'll get lucky near .NET 10 release,
There's
maybe we
rumors. I've
in
heard them.
early
Yeah.
2026. We know that we're not going to know when we're going to get that there, but between now and then, right, we can use this, we can use it for development. Like I said, I'm using it for day-to-day development, haven't seen any negative impacts. But what do you want from us? What's important for us to be doing, aside from, if we have a bug and report it, if we get prompted for a survey, respond to the survey? Are there other things? Are there edge cases? Are there behaviors that you're like, we never get enough feedback on this? Is there anything like that you want us to be aware of?
See, that's a great question. Thank you for that. No, you know what? I think you're the first one who has asked that question, so that's great.
Hey, I try. I've been an MVP for a long time, and I've made really good friends with a lot of the Microsoft folks by starting out with, hey, I broke this thing, and then asking the more important question, what else do you want me to break? Because I can do it, right? And that's what we like to see, right? It's all of those edge cases and where they are, because we know that I know the same thing with the stuff we build for our clients. It's like, oh, you went wandering into the config settings. Okay, yeah, what did you find? But yeah, is there anything like that that sticks out for you?
I mean, so this is always the case, right? If the bug is there, whether we know about it or not. Right. So if you find a bug, please tell us. We really want to fix it. And that's like the way we look at it is that we see all the bug reports. We see them as presents. We see them as a gift that they took time out of their busy workday because they care enough about Visual Studio and their work life situation or whatever, that they wanted to present us with an opportunity to make Visual Studio better. And so that's how we look at any bug report coming in. It's a present. And any bug report that comes in actually goes straight to the team. There's nothing in between you submitting a bug report. If you go to help, send feedback, that system, so it's the developercommunity.visualstudio.com, is a website that tracks all that stuff. You can vote on feature requests and bug reports and stuff like that. But behind that website and behind all those tickets is our internal Azure DevOps instance. So any ticket that is being created on that website has a correlating Azure DevOps ticket that is being assigned. We have logic that figures out what, based on keywords in your bug report and so on, what area path, what team should get that bug report. And so it gets straight into the individual team, like engineering team that works on it, and it gets triaged alongside other bugs that is internally created, let's say. And so it's like every week, multiple times a week, each area, each feature team in Visual Studio is looking at all their bugs, and your bug is among them, and that's really fantastic. So this is very important, and that's the reason we have the preview as well, is so that, like, there's several reasons to have a preview. One is that we can, people can get the latest and greatest faster. So there's just a bunch of people, especially developers, we love to be on the latest and greatest. And so if you have a somewhat stable preview situation or insiders channel, which we have and we've had for years, then it's something that people want to use. And so a small subset of people does that. In the grand scheme of things, it's like a small subset of people, but they get to be testing things out. They get to be the first to try it, and they get to find the issues, report the bugs, so that when the next update comes out to the stable channel, it will have more fixes. Right? It will have all those things that are found in real world scenarios by all the preview and insider users have all been fixed. We also collect telemetry, so we can tell, like, if when it comes to like performance or crashes or hangs or something like that. We get the telemetry early on, so we can see, hey, that update to the insiders or this code change we did had a negative impact on performance. Let's fix that before the next release. And so that's super important that we get those real world telemetry data sent in and those real world bug reports.
That's fantastic. And as somebody that has submitted numerous bug reports, one of the things I can always encourage to everybody, anybody listening here, is submit the feedback. Real humans respond, and it doesn't matter if you're new with Visual Studio or otherwise. And recreation steps, right? Just like we want to get as developers, right? Remember, we're submitting a bug as well. And so if you can recreate it, if you can give a sample, if you can share the information, privacy and other things all considered. But the responses, right? This is one of the things that I absolutely love and have loved for years about these feedback channels is it doesn't go into the abyss. It doesn't get ignored. It is important, though, as a person reporting the bug, if we report it and we get a response back, right? If somebody like Mads or otherwise says, hey, I can't recreate this, can you give me more information? Give them more information, respond to that issue, right? Because those items are triaged incredibly heavily, right? You guys do a great job of moving them. And if you don't get responses, they will close out. If you missed it, if you didn't catch your email, if you're on vacation, just open it back up, right? Everybody is so open and willing to have that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I found a number of things over the last, few years. I do a lot with .NET MAUI. I know that's not necessarily your area, but I've uncovered some real doozies, and everybody's been really nice and prompt to be able to get things out there. And so it's really cool. You can also always see the history of the things that you've submitted. And it's kind of fun to be able to see, hey, I submitted this thing. It was really a bug. It was actually fixed in this release. So there's a really good feedback channel on our side as well as submitters. And it's just nice to be able to see that level of support and helping to make that product better.
And so we're like everybody else, right? So everybody listening in here, watching this, are probably software developers themselves. And so, when you get a bug report, you really want to fix it. And so you hope that it's in a quality, the bug report itself has such a quality that you can take action immediately. Like, you don't have to guess on certain things, and all the information that's required to reproduce the issue is within the bug report. Otherwise, you can't fix it, and you have to go back and ask for more information. And so we're the same. We really want to fix everything, but the higher quality the bug report is, the more likely it is that we can get to it immediately. And so that, we're no different than anybody else.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And one of the things I've learned over the years, right, it's all the things we do, but it's also if you notice anything, if you have something weird, one of the biggest things, if you have third-party extensions, make sure to mention it. Even though it may not be an issue, it's worth noting because the team will at least take that in consideration. I think one of the things that I've always heard people, I don't want to say anything about that because I don't want them to blame those other tools. But one of the things I've seen a ton right now is if you do have some of those in place, sometimes they'll conflict and it makes it harder for everybody to diagnose. That's one of the things I've learned is just own up to what you have turned on, or if you can, take the couple of extra seconds before you submit your bug report, turn off a couple of those other
Hmm.
extensions, see if you can recreate it. Because that's the one thing we control with our environments, and we have all kinds of different machines and configurations and 3 billion settings in Visual Studio. So, my setup and yours might be completely different. um,
Well, we get that information actually. So not always, but in some cases, because when you go to Visual Studio Help menu and you say Open Bug Report, what actually happens is that it opens a website and it logs you in, and there's a service running on Windows. The feedback service runs and automatically signs you into that website and collect logs and stack traces and all sorts of things from the running instance of Visual Studio and attaches to that bug behind the scenes. You can and by default it's submitted, but you can uncheck it if you don't want it on that website. When you create the bug report, you can select not to submit those things, but they're immensely helpful. And I write a bunch of extensions, and sometimes I get from various different teams that have a bug assigned that the user opened. They can see, oh, there is on the stack trace, there's something in here that's an extension, and they figure out, oh, it's mine, and then they assign the bug to me and say, hey, this is your this is your bug. And then I better fix it, right? Otherwise they'll come after me, and so I better do that. And and so sometimes we actually we can close a bug saying, hey, this, we can see that there was a null reference exception being thrown by a DLL that belongs to that extension over here. So we might close it and saying, hey, this is other product. Like, this is an extension, and then we link to the extension. And if we can find, if it's an open source extension, we'd even go in and find their issue tracker and see if there's already a bug open on them on the same thing. And if there is, we'll say, hey, here's the bug that's open. It's being tracked over on the extender side. So go there and add your comment and add your whatever to make them fix it.
yeah,
So this
it's
happens, and we can detect that sometimes automatically.
Yeah, and it's absolutely amazing. When I go look at, my feedback channel, I got it spread across 2 accounts because, life is great there. But it's really fun to be able to see, there were 12 completed feedback items in 17, 14, 14. And you can drill into those and you can see what the people submitted to. If you do have an issue and you're questioning like what level of detail do you want to give, it's kind of fun to see. As I've given feedback over the years, it's also fun to see which ones get voted up versus which ones don't.
Yeah.
I've had a couple of mine that have like 1,000 plus upvotes, and then others that just kind of like whatever, nobody else cares. It's okay.
But it's actually, so yeah, so you might just see a few in that release, but we
Yep.
actually, in the past 12 months, we've actually fixed 18 user reported issues per workday.
Per workday. That's amazing. I was gonna say, 17, 14, 14. That's one
That
of
was
the like
the August update.
that was the August update. And then in 17, 14 preview 6, there's I think 4. It's what the site shows now. And that's the thing, right? Is the feedback and everything else. And this is what I love is, yes, we have issues. We all have issues, but we actually get them fixed. And that's that, going
Mhm.
back to what we're talking about at the very beginning, when we had to get things on DVD and we had to wait. We're not waiting long, right? We're a couple of the things that I've found between the time I've reported it to the time it came out in a VS release has been as short as a couple of weeks. And what's even more amazing sometimes is if there's a workaround, right? We'll get a
Yeah.
comment from the Microsoft teams that say, hey, yep, this is a bug. Yes, we'll get it fixed. But in the interim, if you do this, you'll be fine. And so
Yep.
that gets you going really, really fast. And this is all public channel stuff. This isn't private stuff. This isn't MVP special
Mhm.
treatment. This isn't, anything there. And so, one of my biggest things is we make the software industry and the tooling better collectively by sharing and collaborating. And that's what this is all about, and the same thing goes for, .NET 10 and everything else. So it's been great talking to you. Is there anything else, Mads, you want to talk about? Any specific things you want us to know. I want to be respectful of your time here
Yeah.
today and really appreciate you sitting down and chatting with me.
Yeah. Let's talk about performance real quick.
Yeah.
Because I've seen that some questions have come up sort of online, on Reddit, on Twitter, and elsewhere, LinkedIn. So, we had originally mentioned that Visual Studio 2026 runs best on Windows 11 with 16 logical CPU cores and 64 gigs of memory. And people went like bananas. They're like, I don't have 64 gigs of memory, or like I only have 12 cores. What? This is crazy. And it's like, yeah, there's a difference between minimum requirement and best on. So minimum requirements of Visual Studio 2026 has not changed since 2019. It's the same minimum requirements. What we've done in 2026 is the way we are improving performance lends itself really well to optimizing for multiple cores. So what we've done is that among the things we've done is that we have taken a bunch of sequential execution logic and parallelized it, which is why Visual Studio starts up so much faster, because a bunch of stuff now happens in parallel before Visual Studio is even visible, like when the splash screen runs, let's say. Instead of doing it kind of after the fact, like one at a time, it now does it on, at the same time. So the more cores you've got, the better. If you've got 32 cores, it will be even better than with 16 cores. But if you have 4 cores instead of 2, you will see a way bigger difference. Like you're gonna get so much more out of 4 cores over 2. So if you can move up to 4, if you have 2 today and you can move up to 4, you're going to see a fantastic performance. Like percentage-wise, your gain performance-wise is going to be better than someone that goes from 16 cores to 32, let's say.
So this is an interesting question.
Mm-hmm.
Intel versus AMD versus Snapdragon with 2026. Is there any difference there between processor types? In fact, say similar cores and speeds. What do you see anything better?
The answer. Now I'm super curious. I don't know. I'm super curious about that. I doubt that there is. So there's definitely a difference. I'm sure there's a difference between ARM and the
So it's
64, right?
This is a fun question, and the reason I bring it up is there's a really fun limitation, right, with the machines that exist in the ecosystem right now. And I've been doing a lot of back and forth between an Intel-based system and a Snapdragon Surface. The Snapdragon Surface, even with Visual Studio 2022, performs even better.
Yeah, that's what we hear.
Faster. However, I can't run the emulators for Maui because you can't run, you can do it with Docker and do some funny, weird stuff. And I don't have enough energy to deal with that. But it's very interesting to see that feedback on cores and issues. And I want to repeat that loud for the managers of development teams, because one of the biggest pushbacks I get is, well, why can't we use a lower class machine? And productivity is one of the biggest areas where I see people cut corners is, well, I could buy this laptop for $600 instead of this $1,200 laptop, but the productivity difference for that developer going from 4 cores to 16 cores, or going from 8 gigs of RAM to 32, or whatever the case may be, it's an incremental cost when we look at the grand scheme of what we're doing. And it's amazing to see Visual Studio take advantage of that. And I think that some of the amazing things, and I just love watching with like Task Manager open, seeing the launch of Visual Studio and every single core in my machine goes busy for a second, but it's just a second now, right? It's that much faster. Now,
and it's not like Visual Studio is going to use 64 gigs of memory. A lot of people think that when they see that, hey, it runs best on 64 gigs of memory. Oh, that must mean that Visual Studio is capable of taking advantage of all that. Well, Visual Studio in general is better at taking advantage of 2026 is better at taking advantage of both CPU and memory than it used to be, than 2022. So 2026 is better at using what you've got. No matter what you got, it's better at it. And it's faster on the same hardware than Visual Studio 2022. So that is we know this. The reason for the 64-bit or 64 gigs of memory is actually because of how the garbage collector works in .NET.
Okay.
And so we get it's much more optimized. The way we can the garbage collector works for Visual Studio when Visual Studio is running is just better, and it creates less performance issues for Visual Studio when there is 64 gigs of memory available. So I want to just make sure that I don't know the absolute like super technical reasons for all this stuff. This is like really this is real this is like this is very low level stuff that they've been able to squeeze out with the performance stuff. So I don't fully understand all of it. We will have a blog post that goes into real depth on this. So David Keene, who you might have heard of,
Yep.
He's gonna write that up, and it's gonna be super interesting because there's gonna be something in there that you can use yourself on your own
Yeah,
apps.
this is gonna be awesome, and that was one of the things I was kind of looking at too is, so related to that. Now, I'm interested on GPU recommendations. Does GPU matter in their general recommendations as well, right? So we know your recommendation is 16 cores, 64 gigs of RAM. Is there a recommendation that justifies that bigger, beefier graphics card? Does Visual Studio see as big of a difference? Is there any reason that we care anymore? Because for a while there was, right? GPU acceleration was used to boost performance back in the day. Is that as important these days for Visual Studio as a whole?
I don't think so. It's all runs WPF and it's all pretty optimized and all that. There is still a setting for GPU acceleration, which does have an effect, but it's on modern hardware. It doesn't really matter. Yeah. So no, I don't think. Like for instance, I just have the whatever GPU is in my laptop, which is not a fancy GPU, right? It's just the onboard GPU. Mm-hmm. So. And that's fine.
And you have and I've seen the same thing for a while. And mm-hmm. you bring up one thing I'd love to just kind of close out on is you guys are spending all this time on performance optimization. You're doing things with telemetry to be able to get some of that insight. One of the things for me as a community person, I love learning from others. You guys have deployment at scale. You have massive numbers of users, and it's exciting to hear that you have some blogs coming about the performance. I will be mm-hmm. anxiously awaiting seeing some of those things come up. But one of the things I've always wondered from a Visual Studio perspective, we all know that you collect telemetry. We all have heard through different blog posts over the years the different kinds of things that you can do, right? I mean, at Build, they spout how many new projects were created of this type and those kinds of things. But one of the things I would love to see is as a a user of the .NET ecosystem is this, the same kind of thing that sounds like might be coming out in a blog post about performance. I'd love to see it with telemetry. I'd love to see behind the scenes how you guys do things. Not, I know you can't share what your telemetry is, but how do we architect telemetry, right? As .NET developers, how do we architect to learn from some of the things that you guys have learned from? Because I'm sure you've tried to do things, I've seen it, right? Of you wanted to get some telemetry and the telemetry itself caused problems. I mean, we're all aware that there's a flag that we can pass to the .NET build, right, to turn off telemetry, which we all use to optimize things back.
And Visual Studio itself, you can like opt out of telemetry.
Exactly. But I would love to see some of that content in the future, right? If there's anything that you guys could share, because we get those questions all the time. My developers are like, well, what do we want to do? And there's so much built in. The exciting thing I saw, again, knowing that you're not necessarily a Maui person, but in the preview for 10, right, Maui has perf counters now that we have available for how much time is being spent in render, which is a big problem for us to diagnose. So we know that those tools are there. We know those perf counters. We know the instrumentation. We've had all of this, and I would just love to see some of that behind the scenes sometime, whether it's something that's at one of the conferences, events, blog posts. I didn't necessarily
Yeah, yeah.
know what, or even something that heck, maybe we collaborate to get a an MVP blog post or session on. But
Hmm.
um, I love the performance side of things. It's always been one of my things, and telematics is interesting. My point I'll leave with on the performance side about gobbling memory, because I've heard that same accusation. I'm sitting here right now. We're doing this stream, and my Google Chrome is using 2.5 gig of RAM just to sit over here and have a couple of tabs open and do this live stream. I have
Uh-huh.
6 instances of VS, the Visual Studio Insiders, and it's using less than 1.3 gig for 6 instances open. So pretty
There you
darn
go.
good in
Yeah.
comparison to resources.
Right.
Well, it's been great to have you. Anything else to? Sorry, I did cut you off on the performance side. Anything else you want to
No,
mention?
yeah. Let me just end with saying that this is the first drop of the Insiders build with improved performance, but it is not the last, and we have much more coming when it comes to performance. So you'll
You have
see
more?
it'll get faster.
Well, I'm really excited now because
Yeah.
it's amazing. So,
Oh yeah, no,
um,
this is just the beginning. So
okay.
this is kind of what I've been blogging about and talking about online is like 2026 is very much kind of a foundational release that where UI and performance and AI is kind of built into a different way. There's different architecture now for all those things that allows us to build this pretty amazing stuff on top of. And so that goes with the performance as well. So we're the foundation for like performance optimizations has been laid, and we're going to be able to expand on how we're thinking about performance going forward. But you'll see more before we exit the insider channel. Before we go to the stable release, we'll have several drops with even better performance.
Well,
And
I
then
am.
after we go to the stable release, we're going to have monthly updates. Every month there's going to be a new feature update, and that is going to include performance gains as well.
That leads me, I guess, to my last question for you. Once this goes to stable channel release, and we go, so 2026 is stable channel. Does that mean end of support for VS 2022?
I think that's going to be in that blog post that we're going to
Okay.
have
Okay.
coming out soon on how that's all gonna work out. But whatever support deals you got for 2022 stands. We're not changing what's already there.
Okay. No change right there. And so just like everything else, once things come out, the dates get released, and then we know what's going on,
Yeah,
which is
yeah,
perfect. I mean, from my perspective right now, I don't see any reason to not use the Insiders channel if you can. I know some workplaces don't allow it and things like that, but I encourage people to do it.
yeah.
It's fantastic, and if there's going to be even better performance gains, I'm really
It's
excited.
looking like right now when we look at the very early data, it's only been out a few days, but it looks like it is by far the fastest adopted like preview we've ever done of a major release. And we've done previews for quite a few versions now, major versions. And this might be the fastest, like a lot, by a lot, fastest adopted preview.
Well,
Yeah,
I think it's highly anticipated too. I think that there's some of that soak
that's part of
time,
it.
some of the soak time, some of the things with Copilot. I think that the AI being better integrated, all of those things are such great selling points, and it's just exciting. Well, I really appreciate your time today. I encourage everybody here, go out, download, use it, give that feedback, and we're excited to see what happens and how things continue. And really appreciate you being here today.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for having me on.
Thank you.